all know ahead of time. Now, without further ado, Peg, if you'd like to introduce our guest. And we'll order it for a good night of movies.
Well, we're pleased to welcome Mr. Art Mattson, who is the historian for the village of Lynbrook and co-president of the Lynbrook Historical and Preservation Society. He's here as a repeat performer for us, and we're happy to have you with us again.
Thank you very much. I was here, I guess, it's about almost 10 years ago, since you invited me last time. It's that long, yeah. And what I did was, just previous to that, my arrival and doing a speech here and a slideshow, I had seen Paul Van Wy give a slide lecture to your society, I guess it was 11 years ago. And I was so impressed with what he did because he gave a history of Franklin Square. And he did it with a running commentary and some slides. So I decided to take his idea and add to it a little bit and embellish on his idea. What I've done is I've taken old postcards and old photographs from Lynbrook from, let's say, 1880 to 1929, that range, but most of it around the turn of the century. And what I've done is I've constructed a walking tour of the village at that time, so that you'll see what the village of Lynbrook was like at the turn of the century, covering the period from before the Spanish-American War until World War I, and then a little bit into even the flapper era and the Roaring '20s. Now the walking tour is going to take about 3 miles. We'll cover about 3 miles, so I hope you all brought good walking shoes, some comfortable shoes. Okay.
No paved roads, no cement, no.
No, not a lot of paved roads. You're going to see that. Okay, so and watch out for the horses leave. Okay. So let's start the tour, and let me get the slide going. Oh, I didn't turn it all the way up. I'm sorry. I'll just back it up.
John Cribben, huh?
Okay.
You want this now?
Yes, turn that one out. No, I prefer
That's
to
good.
Everybody ready?
Yes, that's fine. Okay, see this says Lynbrook Historical Society. We've added the word preservation in there, just as you have. And I'm going to add a special segment at the end that has to do with the house we're trying to preserve in Lynbrook, called 71 Union. But I'll get to that at the very end. The title of this is Lynbrook at the Turn of the Century, a walking tour. And that's me, Art Mattson, Lynbrook Village Historian, and I give myself a little credit there for creating this particular walking tour. The donors of all the slides and pictures, most of them, the ones I'm aware of, the Bach family, John Cribben, Eddie Moore, the Simonson family, Michael Spiegel, they've been so generous to provide these wonderful, wonderful pictures. The photographers need credit too, because they are just amazing. Lynbrook has had some incredible photographers going back to the beginning of the century. Leo Bach is just magnificent. You'll see some of his work. A.E. Callwood, John Cribben, who's our current photographer in the village of Lynbrook, is great. And another fellow named Ogden, I don't know his first name. And John Cribben nicely did all the slide reproductions for me. Now you all know this site. This is the Five Corners of Lynbrook. There's the Lynbrook Theater. And that's the Jamaica Savings Bank. And Haagen-Dazs would be there now. I think it just closed. This is Merrick Road running down here out to the east. That motorcyclist, Keith, is not me.
Joining the cop.
Although I am with motorcycles. And, you know, Hempstead Avenue runs up to you folks up in Malverne up that way. This is a site you well know. We're going to step back in time, and I'll take you back little by little to the turn of the century. Same picture, folks. That's Lynbrook 60 years ago. Hard to believe. The Lynbrook Theater isn't even there quite yet. This is Woolworth's, which you remember was down in Atlanta for some period of time, but here it was on the Five Corners. Up above it is a bowling alley. This big pharmacy here, the drugstore, was knocked down to become a parking lot for the NatWest, and now I guess it's the Fleet Bank. And this hotel, the Five Corners Hotel, is now the Jamaica Savings Bank.
And they shorted the cop.
And they're Shorty the cop. And as long as you mention that, who was it who said that? Eddie?
Yep.
Eddie Bruns?
There he is.
There's Shorty the cop. So I asked Shorty to meet us up close and personal, and there's Shorty. He's standing at the Five Corners, and that is, let's look in the same direction. That's the Five Corners Hotel. No, that's not Liggett. That's the Five Corners Hotel. And Shorty, of course, directed traffic for 5 streets, 5 different directions. He was a whirlwind. You wouldn't know it from that girth, but he stood in that corner for about 25 years. They used to say, when you left Jamaica, someone wanted to come out to, say, East Rockaway, they would say, go down Merrick Road, and when you encounter Shorty the cop, make a right. Okay, well, you want to go to Malverne, go down and make a left when you find Shorty, because he was always there. He was a great guy. Believe it or not, this is the same view.
Wow.
That was where the Five Corners Hotel and later the Jamaica Savings Bank was. At this point, that's Corlette's Inn, a restaurant and inn. That building that we saw was Woolworths and later became the theater and all that. That's Bati's Hotel over here. Over here, where we saw Liggett's Drugs, that's the yard of Hamilton. I'm sorry, that's actually a general store, which we'll see a little bit later. Simons' General Store.
What year is this?
This is about 1905. But I didn't want to take you out on a winter day like this, where it looks rather chilly. You know, all the leaves are off these trees, only the pine trees have some leaves. So let's take a summer day. Be more comfortable. And this is still the same view looking towards the east. And here again will be where the theater is. There's Corlette's Inn. And that's the general store that I was mentioning, which is now where Fleet Bank has their parking lot, next to Vincent's Pizza.
St. James's Church steeple was still there back then, huh?
Well, that's St. James Church steeple. Eddie Bruns knows that because he's got a very good memory from 10 years ago when I did this slide. But that steeple isn't there today because St. James is gone. And we'll take a look at St. James Church in a moment, but right now I've asked some of the people in Lynbrook, some of the citizens, to come out and say hello to us. And that is the hotel that is off to the left. I just want to show you this hotel that's here, Bati's Hotel. They're all standing in front of that hotel now. And that's just about where the Lynbrook Theater would be, right about here now. Many of the citizens have come out, and you see the flags flying, and you'll see flags. You know, you had some nice bit of patriotism at the beginning of your meeting with the pledge, but Lynbrook back then was so patriotic, and you'll see flags today flying all over the place. But for today, we have some of the firemen are out, the fire truck, the mayor is here, we'll meet him. These people that look like nurses, they're Red Cross volunteers, we'll meet them. Some of the Boy Scouts, we'll meet them. But right now, I want you to focus on this very unusual building right here. Very unusual. Very hard to tell what that is. No. Try our delicious ice cream. These remind me of Mellow Rolls. Does anybody remember Mellow Rolls?
Sure.
You know, it's funny, I gave the same talk to some young people. They didn't have a clue what I was talking about when I said Mellow Rolls. They had no idea. They were
I had no idea.
And over there it says ice cream, 50 cents. Now that may have been a lot of money back at the turn of the century.
What?
But if you remember, well, none of us really remembers ice cream back then, but the cows were local. I have no doubt they came up, the Gows and, you know, Grossmans and the good German farmers that were up in Malverne. I'll bet that's the source of most of the cream that went into these ice cream treats that they had down in Lynbrook. Heck, half of Lynbrook was farmed at this time. Now these are the firemen that I told you about. This particular group is Hook and Ladder, company number 1, the first company in Lynbrook.
Right.
They were formed in the 1870s. I want some of you to take a look at the numbers and the insignias on their shirts. You notice each one's a little different. His is a very long one. His kind of more spread out. This is a tiny one, larger one. This guy up here, his number one is backwards. In fact, the ladder goes the wrong way. It's like he's ladder and hook company number one instead of hook and ladder. So you see, the women probably, the mothers, the aunts, the sisters, embroidered these designs, and someone got that pattern mixed up and did it backwards. So things were homemade then, and we'll see in some of the later slides that people did make their own dresses and uniforms and things of that sort back then. The guy in the center, that's Bill Dayton, and I'd like to meet him, and he said he'd come over and introduce himself to you. And here he is. This is Bill Dayton. Bill Dayton was the chief of the fire department. He also was the second mayor of Lynbrook. But back then, they didn't call him the mayor. They called him a president. So he was a president of Lynbrook. Now, he's a fairly distinguished figure, but by no means is he as distinguished as his spouse, who was the real force in the Dayton family.
Watch this.
Now, let's meet her. That's Emma. Emma was the force in the family. Not only did she raise the children, she also was Bill's partner in the hardware store that they ran in town. And she was a realtor in Lynbrook, one of the first women realtors in town. Women played a pretty big role in Lynbrook at the turn of the century, as you'll see a little bit later. They ran many of the stores. A lot of the dry goods stores and millinery and other stores were run by women at the turn of the century. We're going to meet her children now. I think, or the kids. This is Harry, and that's Bill Dayton. Harry, well, first let's notice what they're wearing. They're both wearing dresses. I show this to young people, and they start laughing hysterically. In those days, these kids would wear clothes like that until they were weaned. And so these kids, even though young Bill is probably about 2.5 years old here, was probably still being breastfed, because that was the way back then. Young Harry Elmer was one of the first to join the expeditionary force that fought with the British in World War I. This was before the U.S. even joined the battle. He went over there, and he was gassed in France. And for the rest of his life, he suffered from breathing problems. But the people back in Lynbrook heard about his problem and about the terror over in Europe, and they remembered that. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But right now, let's look at Bill. Bill's carrying this long staff. And young Bill went on to become Long Island's premier bandmaster. This was in a day when John Philip Sousa was king of music. This is their house, just off the Five Corners. I think it's on Forest Avenue, I'm pretty sure. The house is gone. This is the Dayton daughter, and I can't remember her name, and 2 cousins. But again, you see all the flags? You're going to see a lot of flags today. They were so patriotic. Can you imagine a house decorated with so many flags today? I mean, no one would show such patriotism. People would probably snicker. But back then, it was really a great thing to do. More flags. This is Harry Dayton and Emma's store. It's a hardware store. Not only, I guess it says it in there, it says builder and supplies, I guess, in the window. But these barrels that are out in front, that was the sign of a hardware store. So for people who couldn't read, you'd see things like the stack barrels and other implements would be put out in front. And here there's a wheelbarrow and some mowers. But that was the sign that there was a hardware store on the street. This is on Atlantic Avenue.
Concrete sidewalk.
I'm sorry, Ed?
Looks like a concrete sidewalk.
I'm not sure. It could be. I would suggest it might be stone, but it could be. But this is most assuredly is dirt street. And we'll see that for sure later. Harry's business was very successful. Oh, a couple of things I want to point out. Up in the window, you can't see it, but when I take a couple of magnifying glasses, I can see that it says S&H green stamps right in there. These paint cans, this photograph is so fine that I can see the name Sapelin Paint on the paint cans. Photography then actually was better than we have today. because the cameras had the size. You have 35 millimeter lens film, they probably had something that's in 100 something millimeter or 200 millimeter. So they didn't have to then blow up the picture. It was big already when the camera took the picture. So they had a level of detail that you don't get with the camera today. It's really amazing. Look at this beam that's right here. That's a building beam, because Harry and Emma were doing such a great job in this store that they had to expand to larger quarters, and they built the store right next door. This building, by the way, still stands, and so does the one that goes up here. And in fact, Miller's Hardware is now in that building. Some of you may know Miller's down at Atlantic Avenue. We're going to look at this same view from a different end. Keep your eye on this barrel, because the barrels move in front of the next store, but you can tell exactly what Dayton's is by those barrels. See the barrels? This is the old store right here, and this is the new one that just went up. Now look at the streets. Surely that is a dirt street. You can see there's no paving there. Although that was an interesting question about the sidewalks, and they do look like it's stone or paving or something. Look at the street, so busy. They had just done a kind of a business improvement district down there back then at the turn of the century. They put electric lines in. Theirs had just gone up recently. And so they had done some work there. Lynbrook, of course, is trying to do that now. I don't think we have as busy a Main Street today as they had back then, because there are some closed stores right now.
More stores open there.
Looks so wide there. It's not wide now, that street. Is that Atlantic Avenue?
It's Atlantic Avenue. I think it probably,
wide there?
well, I think the difference is you do see cars parked along it. When you drive there, you're sensitive to all the cars parked on both sides. You're seeing the full width of the street here. And I think the camera angle is showing you. It's basically the same situation.
South or north?
Looking north, that's Body's Hotel up there, up where the Five Corners is, looking towards Malverne. Okay? So we're down by the train station, looking north. And this guy here, you see him sitting there leaning against the parking meter.
What parking?
He runs. He's really sharp. Of course it's not a parking meter. It's a hitching post. In fact, that's right. In fact, we'll go back to the previous slide, and you can see the hitching post right there. Okay, that's what they had all along the street. There was a series of hitching posts going all the way up, because horses were the means of transportation at the turn of the century.
And fertilizer.
And fertilizer. Yep. Now back to the Five Corners, and this time I want to focus on what was mentioned before, which is St. James Church steeple. And this is the old St. James, which burned down in the 1920s. And I'm looking for a picture of the burned ruins. I know there is one in the collection. I want to get that. But this steeple was so high that just the same people who would say, go down to the Five Corners and look for Shorty and make a right to go to East Rockaway, they would also say, and the way to get to the Five Corners is, you see that steeple out there? They'd say that from Jamaica. You see that steeple? That's St. James Church in Lynbrook. Follow that steeple, and when you see Shorty the cop, make a left to Malverne. Okay? This church was really well known. Unfortunately, it's gone. And so is this church gone. This is the old Sandhole Church.
Yeah.
All of you probably know of the cemetery that's at the corner of Ocean Avenue
Very
and
well.
Merrick Road.
Yeah.
They call it the Rockville Cemetery, but that's not its name.
No.
The real name of the cemetery is the Old Sandhole Cemetery. And this church burned down probably it was in the 1800s. And the church split. One half of it went to Rockville Center, another half moved to another church in Lynbrook. This is now, they put graves now where this church once was.
I think there's 70 or 80 Irishmen buried in there from the sea wreck.
Yeah, there's over 100 actually.
Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't counting distant terms.
Yeah. This building here is the home of Isaac Denton. Now Isaac is the guy who donated the land for that church back in 1785. Isaac Denton is also a guy who was a Tory, who fought against the Minutemen, so to speak, St. George Washington's people on Long Island in the Battle of the Swamp over in Tanglewood. Isaac Denton, that was his house. So you see how far back Lynbrook's history does go. It goes back to the Revolutionary War times.
Is that what that name is?
from the Denton family. Whether it's specific from Isaac, I don't know, but yes, it's the same family.
Was it still Lynbrook in those days, or had it?
No.
Pearsall's Corners.
At this time, in 1785, the area, Lynbrook settlement was right in this area. There were about 40 homes altogether, concentrated kind of by the border of Rockville Center and Lynbrook, was now Lynbrook, because streams, everything was kind of water-oriented back then, and there was a stream called Parsonage Creek that went through there, and there was a parsonage for the old church that preceded this one. And they called the area Parson's Corners. And that was the first name of Lynbrook. Actually, the first name of Lynbrook was Rachcoaki, which became Rockaway. It's an Indian name. That's the Indian tribe that lived here, was the Rachcoakis, Rockaway. And it became called near Rockaway, the general area. Then it became Parson's Corners, then it was called Bloomfield, and then it became Pearsall's Corners, then Pearsall's, and finally Lynbrook. So Lynbrook's had many, many names. And Keith, I understand that Malverne's had at least 3 names that I know. Once some part of it was called Skunk's Hollow, wasn't it? It's actually Lakeview?
Never officially.
Not officially,
No.
but some did call it Skunk's Hollow. Then Norwood,
Norwood.
and then Malverne.
Right.
Okay, so
But
you
that
have
part there, that cemetery is not in Lynbrook.
only this little part over here is in Lynbrook. The other part is the unincorporated town of Hempstead.
Right.
But there is a piece of the cemetery that truly is in Lynbrook, so I count it as Lynbrook.
Okay.
And no other village claims it because it's unincorporated. Back to the 5 corners. Let's look at this corner now. This is Simons's General Store. Looking at it from a slightly different angle, from the north looking south. And there is Mr. Simonson, and there is Mr. Pearsall. And the 2 gentlemen ran the 2 parts of the building. Mr. Simonson ran the general store. He owned the building. Mr. Pearsall was the postmaster. And the post office was in the same building. So part of it was devoted to that. And here are some of the kids also in the front. And you notice there's a horse trough and a hitching rail. Again, everything is horse-oriented in those days. I wanted you to meet first Mr. Pearsall. Let's meet Mr. Simonson first. This is Joe Simonson, and this is in the 1880s in front of the store. And you'll notice it's a little bit unclear, but right over here it says J.S. Simonson, Pearsall's. And there's a proof that the town was not called Lynbrook back then. It was called Pearsall's. And in the 1880s, indeed it was, because it wasn't until 1894 that the town became known as, or the village became known as Lynbrook. Now let's meet the Pearsall. Not the guy who's responsible for the name, but one of the descendants. And I'm kind of losing his hat a little bit here. Maybe I can lower the slide just a little bit. I don't want to lose his hat. How's that? Okay, we don't want to lose that hat. Okay, now historians use clues to identify when things were taken, where they were taken, who it's of. The clue here is what this guy's wearing. That clue tells me when the slide was taken, when the original picture was taken. It's what he's wearing.
Taken
He's
during the
wearing
winter.
formal clothing. And I have seen others wear this same formal clothing at about the same time. And the particular event is a very important event for Long Island, because one of Long Island's own
Teddy Roosevelt.
had been elected to the White House. That's right, Teddy Roosevelt. Mr. Pearsall, being one of the leading citizens of one of the towns, important towns on Long Island, was invited to Washington. A special train was to take these gentlemen down to Washington to celebrate Teddy Roosevelt's inauguration. So this is 1905 that this is taken. And isn't he elegant? Now when I hear the Pearsall name, obviously we think of the village of Pearsall's, because that's what it was, but there was another important Pearsall name, and that ties in with something that Teddy Roosevelt did. Teddy Roosevelt formed a group, and I'll have to keep Ed Bruns quiet in this one. There was a group of a militia. You've heard a lot about militias lately. Well, he formed a militia. Do you remember the name of that militia?
Rough Riders.
The Rough Riders. Okay, they've gotten a bit of a bad name these days, but in those days, they were very well thought of. And this is Lynbrook's own militia. Lynbrook's militia was known as the Pearsall Brigade, a privately formed militia. Their purpose, well, they had seen the Rough Riders raised and shipped off to Cuba and running up San Juan Hill and so doing such great things for the United States. They formed their own home guard, trained and so on. Then when World War I came along, it suddenly became rather important to train young men to also serve as a home defense because no one knew what might happen by way of ships coming over to try to bombard and so on. So they formed the Pearsall Brigade right in Lynbrook, one of the very few militias of the day. Now they're heading across the railroad track, and one of the obvious things that you can see is that the railroad is at grade level, because it wasn't until 1939 that the elevated tracks came through. So they're heading down Atlantic Avenue, about to cross what today would be Sunrise Highway, but even Sunrise Highway didn't exist then. There was no Sunrise Highway. Merrick Road was the only east-west road in our area.
Is that a big clock up there in the right?
That's a big clock. That clock existed up until the 1980s. It stood in front of one of the fire departments. But they decided that no one wanted that clock any longer. They didn't want to maintain it at their expense, and so they sold it. Unfortunately, there was no historical society in Lynbrook at the time, and so that clock was sold off to a dealer. We tried to trace it. We think we know where it is, but it's very expensive to try to bring it back. Now these gentlemen are heading south of town for a very important mission. We're going to follow them and see what's going to take place. Oh, I'm sorry, I moved over a little bit. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We're south of town now, looking back towards the track, looking north. And this is probably about where the Lynbrook Library would be today. That is where these gentlemen are standing. And you see the Pearsall Brigade lined up there with their very real rifles. There's a man walking in with these four gentlemen in their black suits and armbands. And it's a very serious business today. A prayer, I think, is being said here, and this is Reverend Caserta leading. The gentlemen are there with their black suits and armbands. Some of the citizens are out to see what's going to happen. And here is Reverend Caserta giving a benediction, and you see the concern on these gentlemen's faces. If you look closely, you can see even the knit brows. Very, very, very serious thing happening to them. But it's not that these men are about to be shot, which is what one might imagine. Except that might be true. But not today, they're not going to be shot. But they are the first draft in World War I. And they heard about Elmer. And they heard about the gassings there, and the trench warfare, and the horrible loss of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of the bloom of the English and French youth. And so these gentlemen that are the first American troops to go over to fight the Germans, well, these are probably 19 and 20-year-old gentlemen, is what these guys are. They're heading off. But they had tremendous support from Lynbrook. And this is the Pearsall Brigade giving them the hip hip hooray. And here's the mayor, George Wright. Hip hip hooray. But these guys, you know what, they weren't going to go to war. The Pearsall Brigade, most of them were too old. And you can see the gray beards and so on. A lot of support was given by the women. And they didn't just hip hip hooray, they rolled up their sleeves. And here they are collecting information for the draftees. Here's the Dorcas Club. By the way, all these pictures we're seeing in this section having to do with World War I are done by Leo Bach, who's Lynbrook's greatest photographer ever. Look at these hats on the ladies in the Dorcas Club. But what they're doing is they're sewing linens, bed linens, for the hospitals in Europe. And this is the Red Cross. Again, these are all volunteers. And they're rolling bandages. You can see the bandage rolls on the table. And we're going to focus on this particular lady right here. And here she is. She's Frida Hopper. Now, Frida actually lived in the unincorporated village of Lynbrook. In fact, I don't know really, it may even have been part of Malverne at the time. I'm not really certain. But it was on Franklin Avenue, north of where Croissant Fruits is. So it's probably near where your DPW is, just north of there. In fact, we're going to take a look at maybe a house that's up that still has that kind of a front. So Frida was kind of in the no man's land between Lynbrook and Malverne. Here's a dog. The dog is Caesar. This box that's around Caesar's neck is not a medicine box, as you might imagine, such as what St. Bernard's might have. It's a donation box. And there's a little slot at the top that you can hardly see. But there's a story about him that I read in the papers of 1917, that said that Caesar once broke away from Frida up in North Lynbrook and ran down Hempstead Avenue. And when he got down by what is now Peninsula, it was then just a path, he ran over towards, I guess you might say, behind McDonald's, that area. Well, there was a racetrack over there then. Probably anybody's aware that Lynbrook had one of the biggest, the most popular racetracks on Long Island. And that particular Saturday that Caesar ran away from Frida with that box around his neck, after he held in his mouth, he ran over to the racetrack, and the men were there betting. And they had lots of money in their pocket. And they put a lot of that money in that box. And when the dog was finally returned to Frida, that dog on that day had raised more money, something like $37.23, than anybody had ever raised in any day during the war. It was amazing. They wrote this up in the paper. It was just remarkable. So that's just a great story. Now look at Frida's outfit. Isn't that great? Of course, they had cotton outfits that had to starch and iron, and, no permanent press stuff then. And doesn't she just look terrific? This is another of Leo Bach's great photographs. This guy is Ed Talfer. He later became the mayor of East Rockaway. And he's collecting for the war bond effort, and that's his grandma, Mrs. Talfer. And you see this water pump along the side, and the dog looking up. It's just a great composition with the grape arbor on the top. She's taking her money out of the sock, a little purse. Some of you probably remember people hiding their purses in the sock. I think among the Yiddish that's called a knippel. Some of you may know the word, the Yiddish word, where mom would keep her money, her personal money. But this guy appears to be a doughboy. That's what you think. There's a clue, that says that he's not. And that's on his sleeve. Those are merit badges. But he's a Boy Scout. The Boy Scouts were very active raising money for war bonds. Here's a group of them. They're on a bicycle campaign, and they have these signs hanging here say, buy your war bonds. And those Boy Scouts came in a variety of sizes. They look kind of old here. In fact, that's actually the leader. In fact, that's Leo Bach, actually, the guy who took most of the photographs. Now this picture actually has to do with Malverne.
Stony Bird.
Because this tall guy, and Eddie, you got to stop leading. Okay? Let's take a pass, all right?
Right.
No one knows who the tall guy is. Long forgotten. He's a big 6-footer, but this little guy, who's just a little bit over 2 feet, is in fact, as Ed said, Stormy Bird. Stormy became Teddy Snowcrop. If you remember Snowcrop Orange juice. And he also was active in vaudeville. And as you know, vaudevillians were very active in this area of Malverne. And Stormy was, in fact, from Malverne. These are the Girl Scouts. And if you look at the outfits, you see her outfit is very different from hers, it's different from hers, it's different from... Each girl made her own Girl Scout dress. And that was the way they did things then. And not all of them are girls, some of these leaders over here. And this one in particular reminds me of Norman Schwarzkopf in a Girl Scout dress. Now we're heading south from what would now be Sunrise Highway in the southern part of Lynbrook. We're looking south down Union Avenue. This would be Atlantic over this way. Today you'd find the Lynbrook High School right here. And this would be there's a medical buildings and a lot back here. I want you to focus on this building right here, because we're going to get down Union and take a look at what is called the Lyceum building. And there it is, Lynbrook's Lyceum. This was the social center of town. Any big event, any important event, was always held at the Lyceum. And Mr. Hermance, who ran the place, is in front. He's here. He's dressed. He actually also served as a watchman and a cop. That's why he's wearing that uniform. But he did manage the building and own the operation. His wife and his daughters also helped out, and they're with him as well, and some of the kids. Once again, notice the flags. Flags, flags, flags in Lynbrook. Said, Pure Souls 2 East Rockaway, are you coming to our fair? For we have many pretty things to show you when we're there. The way to reach the Lyceum is by the Long Island train, and if you come one evening, you surely come again. I know how old this is because it says Pure Souls there, so I know that this advertisement for the Lyceum was before 1894, because that's when the name was changed to Lynbrook. Little clues like that help the story, and again, identify the age of something. So I just brought this out just to show you how I can tell how old a document is. Sometimes you can tell how old a picture is, or a document. Here's another one that I can tell you the exact year that this took place. Now it only says June 20, 21st, and 22nd, and it does say Pure Souls. So I know it's before 1894, that's good, but I could tell you that it's not only before 1894, I could tell you the exact year, that it's 1892. Well, how do I know that? If you look at it, there's nothing that's really obvious. But look at this word here, the Southside Columbian Fair. Well, 1892 is 400 years after what?
Columbus.
Columbus, that's right. The 400th anniversary of Columbus coming to the New World. And at that time, all over Long Island and all over the eastern seaboard was celebrations, Columbian fairs. And so this was the celebration in 1892 of the Columbian Fair. So I'm able to identify exactly the date of this document. Excuse me, I lost my button. Oh, there it is. Hermance had tuxedo minstrels in the Lyceum. And you can see the blackface on these guys. This is well before Al Jolson's time. And they had plays. And all the big galas and all the balls were held. This is the St. James Church holding their annual gala. There's a small band up there, and again, flags, flags, flags. That was the way you decorated that. Was to show your patriotism, and that was the standard decoration. There's another visual clue that helped me in this particular photograph to identify where things were. Now, I knew where the Lyceum was because we saw that other photograph that showed it was at the corner, just off the corner of Union and Atlantic. But I had another building, which was a Lynbrook school, which I'll show you. This school, I didn't know where it was. And then one day, I was looking at this picture, and suddenly something struck me. Right in the corner, right there. I said, I've seen that somewhere before. So I went to another picture. Boom! There it is. That cupola on the school. So now I knew that that school was just behind the Lyceum. So you use these visual clues to help locate things. Otherwise, I gotta tell you, these get really confusing. You could line up a bunch of pictures of old Lynbrook, and you can't get a clue where things are until you start tying things together with these little visual hints. Well, this is the Lynbrook school. This was the only school in Lynbrook at the time. High school, junior high school, grammar school, everything. K through 12, all of it was in this one building. And I've asked Mr. Vosberg if we couldn't stop inside. Mr. Vosberg is the school superintendent, Dr. Vosberg. And he's asked some of his teachers, in fact all the teachers, to meet with us. Look at those hairdos. This is real turn-of-the-century stuff, huh? With those high Victorian hairdos. And it's quite noticeable that all the teachers are women. Mr. Vosberg has said that we can come into one of the classrooms, and so let's go in. These beautiful scroll desks. Now this picture is from somewhere, I think, about 1906, 7, 8. Somewhere in that area. Maybe 1907. If true, one of these students could be Lynbrook's most famous resident. And that resident is Goodiford Chambers. But I can't, I've studied the faces with magnifying glasses and so on, and I just can't quite make the case that he absolutely is in this picture. But he could be.
Look under a pumpkin.
Look under a pumpkin? Good. Good. Who said that? That was great. Look under a pumpkin. I love it. This is Lillian Pearsall. This was taken at about that time, 1907. And she's 13 years old, and that's the last picture that was ever taken of Lillian Pearsall. The reason is, that's the year that Lillian died. And she died, it's not exactly sure, I've looked at some of the correspondence, but it seems like it might have been typhoid. Could have been the flu, influenza. But it really doesn't matter, because the point I want to raise is that at that time, they had no way to cure those diseases. There was no penicillin, there were no antibiotics. And so when these things would rip through town, they would rip through the people, and there's just no way to stop it. And especially younger people and older people would get hit by this, and they would die from things that today we just stop. Just go get a prescription and it's over, it's done. No, not then. But a lot of people toughed it out, grew up, and these guys are Lynbrook's football team. This is in the late 20s. We're moving forward a little bit. See their leather helmets? These folks aren't quite so rugged. They have outfits that are really interesting, though. These curved hats. I think the date of this is probably in the late 20s.
This would be Lynbrook High School.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Lynbrook High School.
Right.
Yes, I apologize.
It was built in 22.
When was it built?
1922, I think. That's
Well,
what
okay. Well, I know it's after 1922 just by the dress that they're wearing, but I don't know how late it is. It could be 1930 or 31.
Looks like the 30s.
Yeah, it could be early 30s.
Yeah.
But this is the high school as it looked before they slapped all that brick
Yeah.
stuff in front of it. You know, this destroyed the look of the school. And as you see, my time machine is beginning to slip more towards the present. We're gradually kind of creeping back, and now you see the streets are paved. There are automobiles where there were horses. And Body's Hotel is still down there in this picture, so this is the early 30s. I'm sorry?
The Woolworths right next to the Lynbrook?
No, I don't think Woolworths was there yet.
Says 5 and 10.
Might have been Grants, so there was something else
was a
down there.
Grants
Was it
there.
Grants?
Jacobson's
Yeah.
down there.
Woolworths is still up at the end up here, up at the, or was yet to come. Actually, Woolworths was yet to come. It wasn't even in the village yet.
Art, are those tracks there, the trolley on Stoudemire?
That's very good. These tracks here, yes, they're not actually the railroad. It's a trolley car that went from Jamaica through Valley Stream into Lynbrook, all the way out to Freeport and back up around to Hempstead. You know, for 10 cents you could move for a couple of towns worth on the trolley. That only existed for a few years. And now we're sliding back. We're into the 30s. There's Shorty the cop is back at his post, and there's the ice cream parlor and the Five Corners Hotel. Liggett's is there.
Is the bank too.
Body Hotel, the what?
The bank on the right-hand side.
Oh, the bank is
National
there,
Bank,
yes,
yeah.
the bank is there, yeah. And now we've slid completely back, we're back actually in the, this is probably the late 80s, early 90s, and that motorcyclist is still there. But when I see the town today, you know, I'm one of the few, and now you'll be some of the few, who will realize what was there before. That long before the theater and all this was there was Body's Hotel. That before the Jamaica Savings Bank was there, was Corlette's Inn was standing there. That over here in this corner was Simonson's General Store, and Pearsall with his postmaster operated, out of there. But it's all gone now, the trees are all gone that were along there, the beautiful silver maples. Let's just go back one last time and look at it the way it was with St. James Steeple. There's the general store. How beautiful it was back then. And admittedly, there was no way, I guess, to save all that. Lynbrook was too economically energetic. Unlike, say, Sag Harbor or other places that kind of were backwaters, this place was a thriving, churning, vigorous place, and it just recycled through the old and into the new. And it's continued to do that, but I really kind of miss the way it was, and I enjoy looking back at the way it was at the turn of the century. And that's basically it, but I have a little addendum tonight that I just did up a few weeks ago. And it's got to do with a cause that we have at the Lynbrook Historical and Preservation Society. And it has to do with 71 Union. And you may have seen some of that in the newspapers.
Yeah.
Yes.
About how we're trying to save that house. This is the house probably at about 1904. And in the front is sitting a little girl named Alma Kurtz, later to become Alma Underhill. This is right next to the Lynbrook School. The high school would be here today. Of course, at that time, there was no high school there. It was that other building that we saw. And this property was a huge property. It was at least an acre. This is the family. That's little Alma. She's a little bit older here. That's her dad, Mr. and Mrs. Kurtz, and the other kids. And they're standing in the yard, I believe, at 71 Union. Here's the house just a little bit later, and Alma's growing up a little bit more. And here they are in World War II. Now Alma's no longer a little girl, she's now a mom. And that's Alma's daughter. So time is moving on, and that's Alma's mother, the grandmother of the little girl. They're standing in their victory garden in the middle of World War II. And that huge victory garden and all that land back there were really a beautiful thing, and something that Alma and a daughter and a mother loved very much. But someone else coveted that land, and that was the school district. And this is Alma now in about 1969. Alma's there with that pussy cat, and she and the cat look, you know, kind of nice and pleasant. But as you know, a cat, when it gets cornered, can really hiss and scratch and let you know. Well, Alma was cornered too, because the people who wanted her property was the school district. The Lynbrook School District desired to expand their athletic fields, and they wanted to, through the, what's called eminent domain, seize her house and her land. But she fought like a cat. She wrote letters to the editor. She spoke up at every board meeting. She went to the mayor. She went to the county. She went to the congressman. She did everything. And she won a significant victory. She did lose the back portion of her land. And so at least a half an acre was taken away from her. And then now is I think it's a tennis court back there. But she saved the house. And this is the house. Let me just get the focus a little bit better. There it is. And she kept this house beautifully. You can see these rather old-fashioned, but really very nice decorations. beautiful interior. The exterior, she kept it immaculate. You can see the house is really just absolutely gorgeous here. They changed the porch. It originally was very much narrower. But a new battle is in the works now. And the problem is that Alma, as much as she wanted to save this house, and as much as she thought she told her kids to save the house, when she died, she left it to the kids, and the kids, pulling this way, that way, the other way, decided to sell it, and they sold it to a developer. Now the developer said, oh, we're going to keep the house. But once you sell something, you can't constrain the buyer as to what they're going to do. And so the developer said, I'm tearing it down, putting up a 14-unit apartment building. Well, we managed to stop that, but he's still trying to tear it down to put up two-family houses. And you've seen a lot of work we've done to find out about the history of the house. And we have found such a rich history of this house that it's almost incredible. This is, as it turns out, Lynbrook's most historic home. It has people in it, the Ryder family from Ryder Avenue. The Pearsalls live there, from the name of the very town. Driscoll, one of Long Island's most famous Civil War veterans, who fought from Rappahannock to Sherman's March to the Sea. 4 years in the Civil War. Got a medal from Lincoln. The Lyons family's associated from Lyons Place. The Ryders from Ryder Avenue. I mean, you just name a famous Lynbrook. The Abrams Place. You name a famous family from Lynbrook, and they own this house from 1851 on. And so we've tried to use that as an argument, but unfortunately that's only an argument. It does not stop a development. The most ironic thing about this whole thing is that the party that Alma was fighting against, which was the school, and that she saved the house from their kind of predatory attempts, as she called it, may be the hero that may ride into the scene at the last moment and save the house. They're bidding on the house now. They're close to an agreement with the developer. And they may save the house. We've attempted to raise funds as the Lynbrook Historical and Preservation Society, but the price of this at $170,000 or $80,000 plus another $60,000 to rehabilitate it is way beyond our ability to handle, being a brand new organization. So we're really out of the running. But it may well be that it will be saved by the school, so we've got our fingers crossed. And that's it. That's the whole thing. That's the walking tour and the addendum about 71 Union. And thanks a lot. Yes, Keith. Oh, any questions you want?
Did I hear something about at that house, an Indian burial ground?
Let me go up front.
Was there something about an Indian burial ground at that location, or is that?
Yes. We had heard, I had the pleasure of speaking with Grace Fox, who was an old friend of Alma's. And Grace relayed to me a story that Alma had said, that as a young girl, she had found artifacts, Indian artifacts, on the land. And so, and also that there was a family kind of history that they're an Indian burial ground. Now, while we haven't verified that that's true, what we do know is true that a gentleman from Lynbrook named Al Leone, who's a member of our group, was invited on the land by Alma back about 9 or 10 years ago. And he is a guy who likes to find old bottles and old artifacts, like probing down at the earth with a long metal probe. And he did that on her land. And he did it in a place that's called a midden. A midden is what Indians would do when they were shucking clams and throwing the oyster shells in a pile. It would form a kind of a pile. And various artifacts and things can be found there, such as the objects that used to pry open clams and so on. And what he found in there was a prehistoric isn't the word, but it's an Indian Stone Age implement. To look at it just lying on a table, you wouldn't say it is, but when you pick it up and you feel it in your hand, and you see the grooving of the fingers, you can see that this was clearly something that some ancient person designed for a scraper or for prying open clams or something like that. He found that 2.5 feet under in the midst of this pile of clam and oyster shells. So we think that may be there. So we demanded that an archaeological evaluation be done by the developer. And the developer has completed that and submitted it. I just got a copy of it. But he did part of it with a backhoe.
That's it.
Well, you're supposed to take very careful core sampling and so on. Maybe you can't do some backhoe, but we'll take a careful look at what he did. He also did it in the rain, and things just, you can't, it's got to be dry and powdery to evaluate what's in the sediment. So we have some serious questions on what the gentleman, and I don't know if the gentleman, what the company did that did the evaluation.
So, second question, you showed a picture of the old St. Paul church which had burnt down.
Yes.
Did they rebuild it? Were the two of them that burnt down?
There was one
Location?
previous to that.
Previous to that.
Actually, two of them previous to that. There was an original one that was really just...
Same location or?
Same location. The original one was just a 40 by 40 foot, so let's say like the size of this room. That was the whole church, looked like a garage, I understand. That only lasted a short while. Then they built the church, which I have no idea what it looked like, but it burned down. Then that one you saw burned down, and then they didn't rebuild it after that point. They put it in two other locations apart from the cemetery. I think they thought it was a bad luck spot. It may have been lightning bit.
Art, who are some other famous people from Lynbrook?
Well, one of the most famous is certainly Charpentier,
Yes.
a chef who claims that he discovered the crepe Suzette. Now, Lynbrook claims him because on all his advertisements and on his menus, he said Charpentier is of Lynbrook, Long Island. When you look at the map, though, and I see his address on one of the old maps, I can see it's just across the border in East Rockaway. So that's a little bit of a disappointment, but we claim him anyway.
Dixie Walker.
Well, I don't know who Dixie Walker is.
Dixie Walker used to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He's from
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Willie Sutton lived in Lynbrook for a while.
Oh, there are people, yeah, but I'm talking about people from Lynbrook. And yes, there were others that, who may have passed through, and Diamond Jim Brady is one, and there are others who
My
passed.
father was in that Boy Scouts troop with Stormy.
Oh, yeah?
I just have a question. One, where did what name Lynbrook come from? Was Brooklyn spelled backwards?
Well, that would be Kolobulam. You can spell it backwards or something like that. It's actually the syllables transposed.
But it was from Brooklyn originally, or?
Oh, yeah, Brooklyn came first. I mean, Brooklyn is the name that dates back to the Dutch, Buurtland, B-R-U-E-K or something old.
But there any reason why we went to Lynbrook?
Yes.
Brooklyn?
Yes, the name before that, as I mentioned, was Pearsall's. And a lot of people began moving out here when the railroad came through. The railroad came through in 1866. And then the Long Beach line came through in the late 1880s or 1890s. And Lynbrook became more popular as faster trains were coming in, and it began to become well, first it became a summer place where citizens who lived in Brooklyn and wanted to get away from typhoid and things like that because it was healthier out here. And not too far from the shore, would live here. And then the commuter idea began to be an idea, even in the 1890s. And those commuters were saying, we want to have a more progressive place, a place with some more pizzazz, more modern. We want street lights, we want electricity, and we want this place to not be like such a farming community and clamshell huskers that living out here. So they decided to get a new name for the place. And they offered up names like Sandringham. That was one of them. I'm trying to think of it. While Windermere was another. It was a big debate as to what the name would be. And then it was a reporter from the Brooklyn Eagle who also was the station master. And his name was Tom Brennan. And he said, well, a lot of us came from Brooklyn. What a great idea if we simply took the name and spun it around and put the syllables backwards and called it Lynbrook. And it was voted on, and it was boycotted by all the old residents. They wanted nothing from it. They said, this place has been Pearsall's for 50, 60 years, they're going to stay the way. They boycotted the election. Well, the election was something like, 200 to 3. So they said, well, we're now, and of course, since the station master was the guy who coined the name, he put it on the train schedules. So it was a done deal. It was cooked. That's how it
You could do
happened.
an updated one on the slides for the, right before the fire and five corners. Her store was there and that whole side.
I have a picture of the fire, and I'm thinking of doing a slideshow that'll have some, in fact, I just started working on it, a before and after slideshow, that will take various buildings and homes and show what was there before and what's there now with the exact shot, so that I'll take something like the Morrison home, which is gorgeous Victorian home that is so gorgeous, you look at it and say, wow. And then you take a look at what's there today in some stinking little group of stores. The Purple Frog bar or something like that, I think, is there where Morrison's was. And people are just going to go, ugh, you know. But it is what it is. And I want to do some, like, and show maybe some stages where maybe show the burned down stores. I do have a shot of that somewhere. That's it with the questions? Yes, Lorraine?
Regarding your historical society,
Yes.
where is it that you're able to house any of the memorabilia that you're accumulating, or aren't you accumulating?
We use the library.
The library?
Yeah. There's a section that we have that's private that people can't get to without our permission. Because we don't want the public just going in and messing things up.
Where was the racetrack, I wonder?
Well, I actually have a map where we marked it out exactly, but it's in a residential part of. Actually, it's just on our side where we are now, our side of the peninsula. You know the street Driving Park?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, that was the northern extreme of the racetrack. The southern extreme was right down on the peninsula, so it occupied that space from Driving Park south to Peninsula.
What kind of race?
There were horse races.
Automobile.
Not dog races.
But there were horse races and some bicycle races there. Yeah. In fact, Lynbrook was a hotbed of bicycling. I'm just writing an article about that. In fact. They used to come out on a train from Brooklyn and from Queens, and they would start their races, the country races, and they would. A lot of it was just touring. Just hundreds of them would come out and just go on a tour and stop at the various inns, hoist a few, and get back on the train. It became such, there were complaints in the paper. Letters to the editor were written in the local newspapers in the early 1900s, complaining about the dust and the traffic and the noise of all these people on their bicycles. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, what you said, old memory from the 50s. Lynbrook was a big downtown shopping area.
Yes.
And a cousin of mine was getting married. At the last moment, one of the bridesmaids was ill. And another friend of mine was going to get her dress so she could pinch hit as a bridesmaid in this afternoon garden wedding.
And needed a quick fitting, it sounds
No,
like.
no, well, she was getting the actual dress from the
Yeah.
girl who was sick. You know, they were random dresses. And I called up to pick her up because it was an afternoon wedding, and I said, well, where is she? And they had a housekeeper then who said, well, I don't know, she went to Brooklyn.
Oops.
I said, Brooklyn? I said, she'll never make it. She's going to be late.
Right.
But in fact, she had gone to Lynbrook.
Lynbrook, yeah. And made it.
And made it.
Yeah, right.
When did they pave the Sunrise Highway, the old pipeline? You know that more or less?
I think it was in the 20s.
It was.
The 20s, yeah. It's called the pipeline because, well, there are two streets that really roads that into a pipeline, but for different reasons. Peninsula Boulevard was a pipeline.
That's right.
As many of you may know, there was a water supply. Hempstead Lake, that water was pumped using a pump house through pipes that ran down Peninsula, out through Valley Streams, and into Canarsie. So Queens and New York City was getting water from Hempstead Lake. That was one pipeline. But the other pipeline was totally different. That was Sunrise Highway. That ran clear along the South Side Railroad, now the Long Island Railroad. And so it was used to water the locomotives, who were steam engines, and relied on having a regular supply of water for the steam engines. So that pipeline was there for a totally different purpose, but it was not a highway by any means. Not until the 20s, when they didn't have to use, they had more local supply, they didn't need a pipeline then. And then it became a road. So I guess that's it. Oh,
Do you have any
no.
pictures of the anniversary? I think it's the 75th and the 50s and 60s. They had the big celebration in Lynbrook. We had
Pictures
parades.
of the anniversary. Well, the 50th anniversary, we had a parade where people put on period costumes. For the 75th, there were a lot of events, but there were no
What was the costume
costume
one?
events.
Because we had Indian costumes and
That was the 50th.
that was the 50th.
There were a lot of things happened at the 75th too, but they were like, it was a tuxedo formal event and a lot of different things, but I don't happen to have any pictures of it, no. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a token of our appreciation.
Hang that in the library.
Oh, great.
Yes, and thank you for coming.
I'll send it to my
Great
boss,
program.
the mayor of Lynbrook, show that I'm doing something. Because I don't get paid, so. That's right, yes.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you did. Oh, okay. That much power, I think you'd I'll bet that they didn't do it.
I actually went to the liquor store. I didn't mean to jump in. Thank you. Interesting, huh? Yep, Bill. How are you? No wonder you knew so much about Lynbrook.
You were asking the question.
When Stormy Grove was in there, I took up my father because he was in the same Boy Scout troop.